All right, so I'm particularly pleased about today's session as it came actually from a suggestion from an ERA member and member of our steering committee, and we, as I said earlier, we love to have suggestions from others because it makes it far more interesting and vibrant. It's also a team effort, which is something we're keen to do. We've got a content specialist in Clint, and then we've got a researcher talking about her own experiences. So Clint, our first presenter, is the Director of Marketing for the Monash Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences, which is my own faculty here at Monash. Clint is also the Marketing Director for the M8 Alliance of Academic Health Centres, Universities and National Academies. The presentation we're about to see is a cut-down version of one that Clint regularly gives to early career researchers at Monash. So you'll see a few specific references to Monash, but the information is relevant to all of us at our respective universities. I'm really looking forward to this, mate. So, as I say, burning questions at the end, please, before we then move on to Rachel, who I'll introduce before she starts. Okay. Away with it.
What I'm going to cover off on today, very much familiar. It is simply to give you an overview of some of the principles. I will focus on some of the takeaway and some of the simple things that you can do. I do want to provide some context by providing an insight into the media so people actually understand what the media is actually trying to achieve. And the third point there is, as previously stated. When it comes to what is the media and what is media relations, well, media, as you know, can be in various channels and forms. I guess the most interesting thing here is the emergence of non-conventional media, being your online, your social hybrid. The issue there is probably you are more familiar as younger people with these channels than I am, but it's almost an open access environment these days. I don't want to stress about that. I would prefer to talk a bit more about mass media and conventional media. As I put up on the screen, bear in mind they are primarily news gatherers. They all have very different audiences. You get different audiences across the spectrum of newspapers, as you're aware, of television, of radio. If we were all in the one location, I would be asking you to put up your hands right now and tell me who listens to Radio National, who listens to Life Matters. I can see some hands. Well, if you'd listened to Life Matters on Monday, you'd have heard Paul Burton talking about, guess what? That band. So that's still topical. Now, the people that listen to Radio National and Life Matters are not the people listening to Triple M. They're out on work sites and so forth. So, but that doesn't mean Triple M is going to turn up on your with a microphone. It doesn't mean we wouldn't use an opportunity to use them. It simply comes down to different approaches, different audiences, different handling, and in many cases, different story.
That's cool.
So I'm not going to ask you which ones of these are you targeting, but I'm just giving you an idea here that the techniques that we use for mass media are very different to what we would say for the Lancet or Nature or Science. I can tell you this week I've had yet another one of my battles. A major story has emerged. The story has been published in an offshoot of Nature. I had people go to the researcher. The researcher has come back and told us what he has done. And as what often happens with this particular individual, I have gone back and said, I can't understand what you have done. I'm a scientist, I'm not a researcher, and I don't get this stuff. If it comes down to people who have a gluten intolerance may have better lives with technology now that can identify what the problematic content is within. Actually tells me and other people what the outcome of this is. But the trouble is that wasn't the story, and I couldn't get signed off that that was the story. And we actually had a situation where I had the story ready on our web to point to somewhere in Monash where the story was put up. I couldn't get the story put up, and I wasn't prepared to go out to an external source. It was quite open. So these are just some of the battles which I face, and I would simply put it to you, remember that your audience, unless it is in Nature or Science or the likes of that, they're not scientists. You need to be able to dumb down your message. In terms of even mass media, what I conveniently tell my staff all the time is, if you are writing for the age, think that you are writing for a reasonably informed 16-year-old.
What did
If you are writing for the Herald Sun in a CD demographic, quite frankly, think that you are writing for a 12-year-old. If you do that, you'll probably get it right. And I'm not being facetious. That is actually why.
Clint, just for
Yes.
sorry, mate. There seems to be a lot of noise coming from outside one of the nodes. We're hearing quite a lot of conversation.
Yeah, it's not us.
It's Bendigo.
Is it Ben? All right, Bendigo, if you can mute, that would be brilliant. If not,
Matthew,
I
I
might be
suspect
able to
there's no one in the room.
All right, okay. I'll ask Pam Miller to mute them. I'll send her an email.
Okay. Now, the daily media cycle has changed immensely, but it's still relevant. And the reason I bring this to your attention is you need to know where the story goes and where the story goes next. And more importantly, I'd love you to know that my phone rings at 6:20 in the morning. Essentially, the stories typically begin in print media. Now, just so you're aware, your print media, which these days is always your morning media, it gets put to bed about 8 o'clock at night. So by the time you're reading it the next morning on your doorstep, this news is in fact hours and hours and hours old. So that kicks off the cycle. Then the stories that resonate get picked up by radio. The radio producers at 4 o'clock in the morning are reading the newspapers, they're identifying the stories they want to run with. They set up the stories. At 6:28, almost on the dot, they will ring me. They will expect that I have every researcher's mobile phone number in my phone and that I can patch them through to you. Sometimes I pull it off, quite a lot actually. So your people that are working for AM, for Fane, for Mitchell, they are the next step. It goes on to radio. From radio, traditionally, the stories that then resonated on radio would go through to the evening television news. The difference now, of course, is we have around-the-clock 24-hour news. The beauty of 24-hour news is a decent story, once it gets onto that, it keeps going around and around every hour, probably for 24 hours and possibly longer. I can tell you I'm watching a story, and I think it might have been out of QIMR during what was obviously a lull in media, and I watched the story and the research was quite interesting, but it wasn't a great breakthrough. But after a while I was watching it, and what I was actually interested in is how long is this going to go on for? And it went on for at least 2.5 minutes and possibly 3 to 4. And as I said, the story wasn't that great, and I'm just thinking, wow, it's obvious there is no sport. But it also goes to show, you get your story out there at the right time. That story would have gone around every hour. I'm sure they cut it back at some point, but QMR was getting 4 odd minutes of exposure. And also point out, she was a very young researcher. This was not some older head of a laboratory. She was getting national media pickup for probably the best part of the day. And as I said, then you have your traditional evening television news, which for most of us, well, quite frankly, these days we're still at work. From that, the stories that then have a much longer shelf life or of even more interest will go into your magazines and journals, but by that I'm not talking about your peer-reviewed journals, I'm just talking about your mainstream journals. So, coming back then, what actually makes news? And as we used to say in Examine Things, this is, take note of this. What makes news? Things that have an impact. Things that will make a difference to people's lives, as an example. Things that will allow gluten-intolerant people to eat a sandwich in its own way. That has impact. Conflict generally gets attention. When you have Paul O'Brien or John Dixon talking about how wonderful lap banding is, and then you have a psychologist talking about how young people are in no way mentally ready for that kind of surgery, that generates conflict, and conflict itself is often newsworthy. Although I must admit, in that circumstance around here, the rule as I applied it was one side of the argument runs on one day, one side of the argument runs on the next day. What I love about it in a university environment is people that are qualified to have a say can have a say, and I've got to say, typically both sides are respected, although sometimes not necessarily as well. I have to say that, to be honest. Things that are timely. things that relate to things that are happening in the broader world. At the moment, things that relate to the budget are dominating the agenda because there is a budget about to be delivered. So everything that relies on funding, including research, obviously, is making news at the moment. Things that happen in proximity, things that are near you. Very much the province in some ways of local media. If you watch 7 News or Channel 9 News, the big emphasis on made in Melbourne. Proximity, of course, is a variable thing. SBS World News, if it happens on the planet, pretty much it's in proximity. No bad thing. Things of prominence, prominent people. Things of currency. Human interest, again, depends on the channel. Nature and Science and The Lancet aren't so interested in human interest. Again, your mainstream television network, your Herald Sun, if there is a human interest angle, trust me, they'll do a live cross to the woman with a dog in the suburbs who for the first time in 20 years can eat a whole meal sandwich. That's the human interest aspect. Things that are unusual, things that are novel, things that are out of the mainstream. Dogs on surfboards, you've seen them on the television news. Things that are unique. All these things essentially provide what I simply term as the angle, or as I will tell a lot of people, give a dog a bone. People will come to me and they will tell me about their research, which has taken up 20 years of their lives, and they've finally completed it, or the thesis has been written and delivered, and I have to break it to them that for all that, and I appreciate what they've done, to be honest, if it doesn't fit with any of these criteria, bringing it to me with an expectation that it's in the Age or the Financial Review or whatever, it's just not going to happen. But, as I've stated there, a lot of what happens in our faculty and in your faculties for the other institutions makes news. There's lots of news in universities, and the jewel in the crown, of course, are your expert lines and so forth. The media comes to us, and they do. They ring me up and they ask, I'm literally slow news day, what have you got? And we give them a couple of stories that we believe fit in. And again, we try and tailor it to the audience. Literally, I've had 7 News this week going, it's a quiet day, what have you got? These things also make news. So I'm just to point out that do not ever treat the media as free publicity, because it isn't. And also bear in mind that they are not there to advertise what we do. I do not tell them what to run. I will also point out to you, if anybody thinks in general media that they will send you a copy of the media release and you will sign off on it, well, not the story I should say, it does not work that way. It does work that way with in your peer-reviewed environment, because obviously there is a great emphasis on getting it right. For mainstream media, that is not the case, and a journalist would actually consider it to be incredibly insulting. I would also question my competence if I said to them, I want to have a look over that before you put it out. The reality is, of course, the story is often wrong. That's just the nature of the beast. Things will get misreported. That's what happens. This happens too. You don't need to go into the content of that story, but again, just to reinforce, there's a lot of news in that. There's eminence, there's money, there's manipulation, there's fraud. It's an incredibly newsworthy story. But for all that, there's a lot of great things that also make news as well. And these are the things, obviously, which we're trying to drive. So if you can look at some of those things there and think, well, I have things in my world that I can plug into them. Quite frankly, you should be having a conversation with your media team at your institution, preferably well in advance, and tell them that these things are coming up. It's great to know that somebody's going to get an award. It's great to know that someone's going to be, like Dan Lubman's been on the project on network television this week. To me, that's something worth telling people, because it says, we've got a guy who does drug research who is interesting and a great personality. He's our faculty's Waleed Ali, because we don't talk about him because he's from the Faculty of Arts. Even him just doing that, it's great profile for us. It shows that interesting, competent people working in fields of interest to others are actually working in our institution. All these things, even here, of course, have very different audiences. So, what does the media actually want to know? And it is incredibly straightforward, and quite frankly, you know this. They want to know who's involved, who's impacted, who's paid for it, who's going to benefit. They want to know what it is. And again, I'll refer you back to try and make it intelligible to the audience what it actually is. They want to know where, because it's that proximity thing again. They want to know when. They want to know why. This is a tricky one. They want to know how. Sometimes you may not be able to tell them how, really. If it involves a synchrotron, possibly not. But if you can explain it in simple terms how it works, because we employ light beams to be able to discover within certain forms by using a synchrotron, that's great. And as I said, you can answer all those questions and provide them with an angle. You've got yourself a story. There's something that they can actually run with. And I'll point out, everything you feed to the media is competitive. They get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of media releases a day. And the first thing you're trying to do is actually cut through all that, typically with a sub-editor, trying to come up with something they will actually run. The way I do this is we actually write in the style of the targeted channel, so they actually don't have to rewrite it very much anyway. That makes it easier, because don't assume that journalists aren't necessarily not the laziest people in the world either. If you can give it to them on a platter, it certainly helps. That's that from here. That's a real day. That is actually one particular day. That's just the media pickup, by the way. That's not what gone out. I don't know the fraction of what went out to what got picked up, but that's Monash faculty exposure in a day. I'm guessing it might have been a Monday. I tend to get a lot on a Monday. Again, I go back to things like this happen around here. So, where do you fit in? Oh, look who's outside. It happens. I can tell you more than once, I've got the phone call here at Clayton campus. There's a film crew outside. Go and see what they want. What I really love is when they're trying to talk to someone about arts. It's even better, or his echo. Nobody wants to be ambushed by the media, but this does happen. If we had a chemical leak on campus, and we have, the media turns up. There's lots of fire engines, there's lots of flashing lights. Guess who monitors the fire engine and emergency services radio channel? So, working with the media. Be aware that it is a very competitive, high-pressure industry, and I think you're all aware of that. They have deadlines. Now, that means they're not necessarily going to research properly, they're not necessarily going to get the story right. So again, anything that you can do to keep it simple and to literally kind of do the research for them makes life a lot easier. Yep, they need to be alert. You may not be aware that as well as sending out media releases, which are typically you're giving them the story, the other thing we send out is a media alert, which generally means turn up to an event, turn up to an opening, the minister's coming, turn up to a press conference, that kind of thing. You may then send out a media release afterwards telling them what actually happened. Background briefings are incredibly important, particularly television. We get 9, 10, SBS. I was going to not include ABC. We had ABC Catalyst on campus here this week, doing some things with our nutritionists and dietitians. They need to be background briefed. If you get Catalyst, chances are you're dealing with very intelligent people with PhDs anyway. If you're dealing with mainstream media, I've got to say your healthcare reporters and your science reporters are generally pretty switched on people. But that's not to say that the science reporter didn't used to be a sports reporter and also deals with finance and the weather on weekends. That happens as well. Yeah, I can't stress this enough. It's not a source of free advertising. if you're just going to come up with a story which is nothing but blatant publicity seeking, chances are not going to run it. Being a reliable source of information, it's probably more to do with my people than with researchers themselves, but we basically have a relationship of trust with the media, and that is based upon being reliable. Obviously, we are here to put the Monash story across, which is, as I point out, not necessarily, I won't say not reality, but we are there to put a positive, I won't use the word spin, but a positive angle to things when they happen. When we have a chemical leak, what a fantastic opportunity to test the response mechanisms and our policies and reassert our commitment to ensuring the occupational health and safety of all staff. Don't slant the facts though, or tell half the story. Generally it will come back and bite you, and for example John Dixon, and I pointed out in his case, totally unwittingly could well have fallen victim to that. Never provide false information, it will just destroy your credibility completely, and it becomes another story. That's the problem. Be as cooperative as possible. There are limits to that. Now, given I haven't got the hide slide function operating that I thought of, I'll actually show you something perhaps coming up, and I might just give you an anecdote. There are limits. Be available. That's a really tough one. The fact is the media will come, they want to do the job, they want to get out. They have deadlines, they work shifts. I can tell you they rarely come out at night, and they don't work weekends in many instances. They're not working on a 24-hour day basis, even if their medium is 24 hours a day. Now this one I put in red because what I would suggest is, no, sometimes my job indeed is to absolutely stand between the and the dean. But in a typical environment, and presumably the CEO has had training such as you are facing today, and then some, and then some, and then some. It's actually part of the CEO's job description, really, to front the media when required. And these days, you see that all the time. The CEO doesn't front the media. Can I use words like Alan Joyce as an example? These things themselves become then the story and gain their own momentum. Don't repeat second-hand facts, obviously. This is so important. Know your organisation. Know what you are doing. Know what other elements of your faculty are doing which may have crossover into the area that you are doing. They may have gone and spoken to those people the week before, but they may have got media coverage the week before. And I'll point out that the media doesn't necessarily understand that what goes on with Monash University at Monash Health, at MMC, isn't the same as what goes on at the Alfred. So what I'm suggesting to you there is plenty of information on your respective institutions. It'll be on your web pages. You'll have your daily headlines page. I'd like to think that you might have your home page with a landing page for your faculty, and if you go there you will see what is going on. You need to know what your Vice-Chancellor is thinking. What is his vision? You might want to be in tune with the Medical Deans of Australia as another example. If they have a position on something, it's actually probably good if you're reflecting that, unless you're deliberately not trying to reflect that and wanting to be contrarian. You might want to know what the Group of 8's position is and other groupings that I've indicated there. Do that. Now, this is so important. I want you to remember that your objectives may not be compatible with the media channel itself that you are dealing with. And that's why I'm bringing this gentleman into the equation. We all know who he is. We all know how filthy rich he is. He didn't get there by providing a conduit for organisations such as this to put their message across. He deals through many of his channels with sensationalism, as you are aware. Why? Because it sells. I can prove that because he's fantastically wealthy. So don't think that he or his minions and agents are necessarily going to put across the story that you want put across. They are not a public service. They are there actually to make money for the corporation amongst other private channels. Now, for those of you who are within faculty, I've got to be a bit careful with this. The Marketing Communications Unit provides the media with access to experts. That's the 6:20 a.m. phone call. Or, incidentally, can I just put it to you, if you have an expert line facility where in your institution there is a list or a database of people who can speak to the media about certain issues, certainly get onto it in due course. Get onto it when you are feeling comfortable to talk about your area of expertise. For me as a non-scientist, I've got to say it's always very interesting that I will approach someone who I believe is an expert in a certain area, and they will make it clear to me they are an expert in a very narrow silo. And even though the story might be about the next silo, there's often a real reticence of the researcher to talk about that. And the reason is, no, there is someone else at the University of Queensland, and he is the expert on that, and I will appear to be not as competent if I talk about that. Bear in mind, all of us also know that we have some certain media tarts about the place. You can go to pretty much anything. They're very handy people to have, and I'm not naming names. Yes, we do build up favour with particular journalists and editors. We give them exclusive stories. We tell certain people, I'm giving you this, you can break this story, I'm not giving it to anyone else until afterwards. Traditionally, we've done it with boardroom lunches. If my comms manager, Catherine, was here in a different time and space, we both worked essentially in the finance industry, it became very obvious to us very early that your average finance journalist actually had very little knowledge about finance, very little knowledge about mining. And what we did, we got them into lunch. We got them in with experts, your Robert Champion, Decrepinies and people like that, and they could ask questions to these people, but more to the point, they could ask questions about asking questions. They could actually get an insight over lunch. This is what the mining industry really does. This is what financiers really do. It was almost providing training to these guys. And I'll point out, the guy that's doing finance may have been doing the motoring column a couple of years or months earlier. Just put partnerships, just so you're aware, the M8, of which I'm the marketing director, I'll talk about that later too. The Lancet is a close quarters observer. They sit on most of our executive meetings if they're actually present. Richard Horton is somebody who I know. And Deutsche Ersteblatt, which is the German preeminent medical journal. Vera Zilkov-Icon is someone else I also know. Operate very closely with them. I'll point out a couple of weeks ago, Richard Horton was actually very critical. He was moderately critical of the M8 Alliance, simply questioning what it had achieved, what was its direction, what was it going to do. Now, I know who fed him the story, and it wasn't me. But I think that was gold. That criticism, there is actually a modicum of truth to all exposure is good exposure, all publicity is good publicity. But more to the point, he was actually talking, I think, which was some truths. He actually pointed out that the Lancet was actually a participant in the M8, but it was fantastic to actually, one, get the coverage, and two, actually have you been quite critical, because that has actually triggered some reform within the group to actually make advances in research, make advances in education, and make some advances in its own corporate governance, which I'm actually very grateful for. Manage access, as I said. So this is what we kind of do. So these are some more takeaways. And certainly, remember that you represent your respective organisations when you are doing the interview. Professor X, you're actually Mr. Monash when you are in front of a camera or when you've got a journalist talking to you with a voice recorder. As I said earlier, be aware of the latest news. You're talking about your science, and the journalist wants to know about the 200 people at Victoria University who are going to be made redundant in the next 12 months. Just be aware of that. It might spoil. The question might be, well, how are you going to actually do this research if you're getting rid of researchers? Now, that's not a question for you to answer, and I'd suggest you would avoid it. But that's the sort of thing that can happen. This next one is so important. Prepare your facts. Know what your key message is. Now, what I tell people when we do practical media training, and you've seen this all the time with politicians, is it's not about answering the question necessarily unless you want to answer it. It is actually about getting your message across. And you've all seen the techniques. It's a wonderful question. But before I answer that, I want you to know that. And that's where the key message goes in. So know what the message is you want to get across. And again, know your audience, because the media ultimately is merely a conduit to that audience. That is so interesting to somebody, but to the audience, no. This is wonderful. I look at this. This is the local leader publication for the Oakley-Clayton area. And I look at this. It's got drama. It's got people. It's got tension. It's got privacy. It's got timeliness. It happened. It happened this week at Monash Medical Centre. I wish I could actually read it. Generally, I pick all these things out. But it's just got so many elements of what makes a fantastic story. It's got human interest. The guy lives. And best of all, it's got that image. It's action-packed. Lives are on the line. And the competent Monash University trained people at Monash Medical Centre are going to make this guy live. That's just a great story for anybody. It's just a wonderful example of what you can get. Now, here's a couple of things you might want to remember. The camera or the microphone is on, okay? That's just the way it is. And don't ever do the old off-the-record thing. The only people that do off the record is typically your communications manager, who has an established relationship with the media and who, for reasons of background or context, may say to the guy, mate, off the record. And often it'll be, look, mate, what's going to happen is next week something even bigger is going to happen. Okay? So if you focus upon this, next week this is going to happen, this would be a good direction to head in. It is not for you as the researcher to do anything off the record, so I suggest strongly that you don't do it. I'll also mention something else which I've done in a number of these sessions where people have asked me for something a bit more practical. A real problem area is the use of animals as a platform. In particular, I'll use the P word, primates. My advice to you is very, very strongly, do not talk to anybody about anything to do with primates. There's just way too much emotion. There is a very, very real threat from animal activists who, I can tell you, they monitor our media. They follow my Twitter feed, I can tell you. I mean, they're there, they're openly there. And that's fine. Anything to do with primates, I can tell you, if it comes to me, I escalate it to the Office of the Vice-Chancellor. That's where it gets resolved. It's just too sensitive. And indeed, the dogs, dare I say, we know where they are, is also problematic. For some reason, the sheep are not problematic because we eat sheep. But even, a lot of the things there are very confronting to anyone. I was going to say to a general audience. I'm sure they're confronting actually to researchers working in that environment. So simply, another thing to take away, do not ever go into the world of the primates. Just shut up shop completely if you get taken in that direction. Now, what you need to do, what I suggest you might want to do as an exercise is come up with the condensed version, the elevator conversation, so to speak. In 10 seconds, can you convey to a lay person what you do? You may never have actually considered, do I need to do that? And the reason is, if you're talking to a journalist, it's probably what you need to do. And as I've indicated there, if you talk for 30 seconds anyway, the television will edit it down to 5 seconds. You need to have something you can actually edit down. We have this with our internal audio-visual stuff, and I can tell you sometimes it's always had to be word by word. We have cut and paste to try and get something useful. So it's great that you've got your peer review audience. Certainly have your highbrow communication with them, but just bear in mind a lot of the people you are dealing with, a lot of the people you want to influence and inform, they're not going to get that. Please come up with the condensed version. It's a very useful tool for you to have. Researchers love to hedge. The evidence indicates, right, it's not really good media conversation. It basically says, look, I'm not really sure. So just be conscious of your language. I think younger researchers probably don't have the inhibitions that perhaps some of the older researchers, more experienced people have. You can see some other examples there. Media is not interested in that. The media wants absolutes. They're going to edit it down to the absolutes anyway. So, yeah, just be conscious of the way that you're presenting yourself. Try and take a position. Yeah, don't bombard people with facts. And again, if you make the facts align with your audience, that'd be sensational. I'll tell you what, if it's going to improve the performance of AFL teams, you've got gold. And I'm not kidding. This you've got in the notes, but again, there's simply facts that you need to consider. And I guess the bottom line there is important. It's not about dumbing it down. It's actually about being able to convey what is important to the right people in the right format. So, going back to this, which again, you could have told me this. Have this in mind. If you're going to talk to the media, write down who, what, where, when, why and how. So you've actually got in front of you, yep, that's who it was, I can remember that. This is the message I need to get across. Very normal practice for a researcher to ask for the questions in advance, or we, if we are brokering the contact, will do that. What is it that not Catalyst will be filming the segment, but what is it that the healthcare reporter or the science reporter wants to know? Okay, they're not there to put you on the spot generally. I'll come to that though. Have your message and stick to it. And a simple tool, and I've had this happen, is when they arrive on site, is, mate, just give me a couple of seconds and I'll come over and I'll talk to you about this. And you simply go away with your notepad, and again, I would be going through who, what, when, where, how, why. Maybe an angle, what do I need to say, and what do I definitely not need to say. Okay, so you don't have to answer them on the spot. Don't be put on the spot. And that's a very simple tool. If they film that, they're filming someone saying, I'll get back to you in a couple of minutes. I mean, that's not going anywhere on the media. Put your main points up front. Don't try and build up to a crescendo, is what I'm saying. And in a media release, just be aware that what happens is the sub-editor starts cutting out paragraphs from the bottom. Okay, so don't try and come to a logical conclusion. Put up front, Monash cures cancer. This has occurred through. Okay, do it that way. Assume that line by line, which is what happens, they will edit back from the top. Yep, concise positive statement of 30 words and less. That's that conversation. Again, the elevator conversation, 30 words, 30 seconds. Yeah, get to the point. Yeah, why? Because using the TRF with Army at MMC in MHTP is really good. Well, I'm sorry, your audience doesn't get that. In front of a camera, don't look at the camera. If you look down the barrel of the camera, no, that's what newsreaders do. Simply talk to the interviewer, who will be standing typically to the right-hand side of the camera. Talk to the interviewer. Don't make your eyes go to the camera because you look shifty. So I used to actually put in a video of a certain person who was doing that. He kept looking sideways. He looked very shifty and very uncomfortable. And I asked the question of the audience, who's he looking at? And they worked it out. Yes, he's looking at me. And I'm looking at him going, don't answer that. Looking extremely uncomfortable. Just talk to the interviewer. Don't say no comment. Making no comment is better than saying no comment. Keep it composed. If you need to basically step aside for a minute and come back, bear in mind most of your science reporters are incredibly friendly. They're not there to put you on the spot at all. Just answer one question at a time. If you need to break it down and ask, did that answer your question? Yeah, and your next question was, don't worry, they'll edit that. You're not going to be doing live television typically. Don't speculate. If you don't know, tell people you don't know. The only problem is when it comes up to you saying you don't know for the 50th time, they figure you weren't the best person to interview. Or you're Rupert Murdoch at an inquiry. Stay within your sphere of responsibility. Always a trap for young players, that one. Don't repeat negative or emotional words. So, Clint, how many people need to die before the university takes health and safety seriously? I can tell you that nobody has to die. And what does the audience hear? Die, die, repetition of die. So, Clint, how many people have to die before Monash takes its health and safety responsibilities seriously? I want you to know that Monash University is totally committed to the highest standards of occupational health and safety, both in terms of policy and practice, and values its employees incredibly highly. And I didn't say die. Definitely don't comment on Monash policy unless you're responsible for managing the policy. But if you are talking about government policy because you're an expert, gambling is a perfect example, that's fine. That's not talking about Monash policy. Yeah, as I said, don't be afraid to say I don't know, just don't do it a lot. Definitely don't take the friendly journalist for granted. They're not your friends, they are not your mates, and sometimes they are something else. Not getting involved doesn't necessarily diminish reporting. Of course, if you don't engage at all, that works unless it's the old tabloid television showing that you're just shutting the door and walking away. Most media does not do that. Have 3 key messages. That's always good. Don't cover it, you don't know it. And then the bottom one, of course, seek advice. Let's just treat that as your relevant institutions will have people who can assist you. They may be at central university institutional level, they may be at faculty level, they could be somewhere else. I'll guarantee most of you will not have the phone number for these people in your phone. And when you need to talk to these people, that's when you won't be able to get. I'm available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You want a case study? So, look, basically just to cover off at this point, this was about familiarising you with some of the principles for dealing with media interaction, trying to give you an idea as to how the media works, what its rationale is. If you're dealing with SBS or ABC, it's going to make life a lot easier because they're actually about delivering news as opposed to making money. Chances are they'll report more accurately. I think I've given you a few practical tips there for you to use and take away. Sorry, don't worry about that. Here's someone that loves a question. Are there any burning questions, Matthew, that any of the audience might have for me at this point?
Thank you so much, Clint. That was really interesting.
Right.
Yeah. First questions before we move on to Rachel. If I can't see you put up your tiny little hands, just speak out.
That's good. It means I've got the message across. So
I'll ask a quick question, mate.
Yeah.
Would you, particularly for ECRs and emerging research, would you recommend they always come through the media unit when they're engaging with the media? Should they get used to using you guys, whether it's at faculty level or central level or whatever?
It's good just to know. I mean, the way I like to do things is we'd be there assisting, and I always tell people if it's a serious media channel, do you want me there? Do you want one of my people there? Burton this week, well, clearly he was actually in his surgery or at home. Even though I had someone at the Alfred, he was like, no, I don't need anyone, I'm fine. And I pointed out to him, I said, you're talking about what you know. They're going to ask you about what you know. Life Matters isn't particularly confrontational, even in the very sensitive area of surgery. They'll be looking for facts. My concern was who else was going to be on the program. Was it going to be an opposing opinion? And in fact, it was almost a complementary opinion. But even for us just to know, because there's nothing worse than we're dealing with the same media channel. We don't know that researcher X over in Building 76 has been talking to these people and we don't know about it. Also, we want to tell people that you've been talking to them. That's part of the deal as well. So if anyone can just drop us an email or a phone call just saying I'm doing this. And often we can also help prep people. Those of you from the School of Biomedical Sciences who have Vicky Burkett on your staff, I can tell you she can provide a very, very comprehensive briefing capability, and she will actually run you through questions. But a lot of people don't need that. But an ECR typically, it wouldn't hurt because you're simply not. The media hasn't been banging on your door, so to speak. So we're there to help.
Well, we certainly wanted to run this session because we know there are people who are quite worried about engaging with the media, and that idea that, as you said, the story may not be what you wanted it to be in the end because they haven't had the time to do the research and they want to focus on a particular angle that wasn't the one that you were specifically pushing and so on. So, yeah, I certainly encourage people to get involved and be careful. I know just before Christmas, one of my own research interests is in looking at the impact on heat on older people, vulnerability to heat. And we're actually looking more about also resilience and capacity to adapt and so on. So they came to everyone within my school and said, do you want to do a media release? And they actually nominated something for me, which I jumped 300 feet backwards straight away because it was something quite controversial that I didn't want to touch. And so they said, well, how about older people and vulnerability to heat? And I got about 6 or 7 requests because we were coming into a heat wave in every other state than Victoria, talking about older people and heat, including I spoke to people in Queensland, people in WA. It was still quite cool here. And I had to very carefully say, look, I'm not actually a medical researcher because it was confusing because I'm in a medical school. And so I could give them the basic information and then go and talk about the resilience sort of stuff that I was doing. But it was interesting to some of them, they only had the first 2 lines, which was, that older people are vulnerable and this is what you do. And as you say, ABC actually it was a proper news story where they talked to me for quite a while, and they put a transcript up and all the rest of it. So, I got more value out of that. But you've got to be careful. The title was slightly misleading. It wasn't what I meant it to say, and that was entirely my fault for not thinking about it at the time as to what sort of questions I was going to get. I learnt rapidly from the first interview that that's not what they were going to ask me about.
Can I make a comment too?
Yeah.
I've had a tiny bit of experience because I'm very early research. Unfortunately, I was really lucky. It was very positive experience. But there is somebody I know who is an artist, and you would think being asked to do an interview about a show which was called Dancing Made a Man Out of Me. And it was very interesting. It got everywhere because it was all about intercultural liaison. It had dancing from different cultures. It became this great big sort of global cultural thing that it grew into. But the same person, when he went in, had done a painting of a man, a diver under sea, dancing with a crocodile. And the day before the interview, Steve Irwin died.
Oh, God.
And so he was asked, what did he think of Steve Irwin?
Right. The crossover, absolutely. I also point out you've
handled
raised
it
another...
very well because he was experienced, but I wouldn't have.
You've raised another point which I should have thrown in, which one of the banes of my existence is you've got a very big story, you gear it up, it's all on embargo, the story goes out, and I've had this happen, and an election is called that day. Bye-bye, lots of work. You'll get no exposure whatsoever. You're in competition. So it's just another point of proximity to other stories such as Steve Irwin. You can just get blown out of the water and your story will go nowhere. No reflection on the quality of your research.
Is there a capacity to bring it back out again 2 weeks later, or once it's been out there, the media know that it's already been out and that they're not interested anymore?
It can be done. If nobody picks up on it, and this does happen from time to time, it's probably better that actually happens because then we try and find another angle, or we'll talk to the researcher and I'll say, well, when's the next thing you're going to do with this? Oh, well, we're going to have a public exhibition, we're going to have a law. I'm going to have a paper published in the next couple of weeks. What we probably do is reconfigure the story and push it out again. So you're not actually pushing, well, you're pushing out the same story, I guess, but if it didn't get picked up, well, it didn't get picked up. So it's a fresh story. and simply on another day where there hasn't been an election called, guess what? There is literally space in the media to put the story out, and in a number of instances, second time around, and we've had ones that have not been picked up at all, and yet a week later get picked up because, well, again, to use your example, if we went out and said, stingrays are dangerous, it may not be the biggest story on the planet until Steve Irwin dies. And suddenly we go out, stingrays are dangerous, you'd have the media lining up.
All right, I've got plenty more questions, but I'll hold them off. We'll move on to our next presenter, Rachel, and I'll flip my page. Rachel is a research fellow at the John Richards Initiative at La Trobe University in Albury-Wodonga and is conducting research on ageing and aged care with a particular focus on rural ageing. And Rachel will be sharing her experiences about building a media profile, including traditional and non-traditional media, such as The Conversation and YouTube and so on. And while Rachel's not, I think the term earlier was a media tart, she is showing how important it is to actually make a connection, particularly for someone in a rural location where you're not in front of the cameras all the time. So it is important to actually get yourself heard and seen, but it's something we all struggle with. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thanks, Matthew. And I can by no means say that I am a media expert even, but I have drawn on media a fair bit to build my research profile and to get my results out there. So today I guess I'm just going to talk a little bit how I have drawn on social and other forms of media to both, I guess, to promote my own research profile and engage in knowledge translation, and some of the tips that have helped me actually get my stuff out into the media and out in a public forum. So I guess that the first avenue is one of the more traditional, or some of the more traditional forms of media, such as newspapers, radio and television. And I guess to date this is probably the primary way in which I have engaged with the media, and I've done so for a couple of more distinct reasons. The first is on more of a local basis to inform communities about research that we're doing and also to recruit participants. As Matthew said, because we often, within my research unit, do our research in regional and smaller rural areas, we will often try to get an article about our research projects in local newspapers as a key stage in recruitment. So that way that when we go out to talk to community organisations and older residents and other people that we might be targeting for our research, when we go out to talk to them to recruit, more often than not, they've read about our stuff in the local paper already. They know what our research is about. They know why we're doing it and why it's important. And I guess I've found over probably the last 5 years that we've been doing this, that in a lot of cases it does seem to legitimise our research and give us some credibility in rural communities. So we're not going in cold. They know a little bit about us. They know what we're doing, and that's much more palatable to our participants. And it also keeps the community informed of what is going on. I mean, I've heard some wonderful stories where I'll have said to people, oh, I'm coming out, I've been out talking to people about this, and they'll say, oh, we saw you a bit in the paper and we've been seeing the La Trobe car and we know that what you're doing. So they can sort of place you, so they know what you're doing. While we usually do this by means of a general media release that we target specifically to local media outlets, such as local radio, regional and more local newspapers, on occasion we have actually just approached local papers directly and told them a bit about what they're doing, and they've been really happy to run a bit of a story about what we're doing. They are always looking for local interest stuff, particularly where outside organisations sometimes are coming in to engage with their community for a specific reason. So that's been a really successful strategy that we've used. Sometimes just a direct sort of advertisement where we're looking for participants that obviously we get cleared through ethics, and we put that directly into local newspapers just giving a bit of information about the research that we're doing and asking for participants and giving our contact details and that sort of thing. Another strategy we've also used is liaising with local organisations such as councils or local hospitals or bush nursing centres, because they often have dedicated information sections in local newspapers on a weekly basis or however often the newspapers come out. And they're often really happy for us to have a section in there to talk a little bit about our research and say, hey, we're coming out to so-and-so to do some work on this because X, Y, Z. And particularly if these organisations have funded or are involved in the research in some way, because it's good promotion for them too, that they're going out there and engaging with universities and that sort of thing. The second reason I guess we engage with newspapers and radio and the like is to obviously put our results out there into a more public forum. And generally when we do finish a research project, we will draft a media release in conjunction with the university, sharing some of our key results and their significance. We circulate the university, so we make sure that it goes, there's a feature that goes on our university website. So when you click on the La Trobe University homepage, there's often a sidebar that has news items on there, so we always make sure that we get a feature on our research findings on there. And that obviously goes out to local, regional, state and national media outlets as well through our media department. We've also done this too when we've run forums or conferences or had international guest speakers on a particular topic come in. So we've let the media know that they've come out and where they're from and why it's so important that they're coming out to talk about this very significant and timely topic. By using some of these strategies, I've been able to speak about some of my research on ABC radio, another local radio station, often at 6 a.m. in the morning. I want to talk to you for the radio, unfortunately. Being featured on television news, so Win News and Prime News in the evening, and have had articles on my research in newspapers pretty much all over Victoria. It was really interesting, actually. We put out a media release for a project we were doing in 2 specific rural communities, looking at social participation for older people in rural areas. And we put it out as a general media release, hoping that it would be picked up by sort of the regional areas in which we're doing the research. But in reality, it went out all over Victoria, state, saying there's researchers at La Trobe University doing research on social participation for older people. So that was really good. And again, I think that comes down to the fact that we were able to say in the media release, social participation for older people is really important because, and some of the more local papers in other areas were able to identify with that. So that's been quite successful for us too. I guess I found the keys in getting your stuff to be picked up in that more traditional media is all in how you structure the significance of your results, as Clint sort of alluded to already. It has to have that wider focus, so it's picked up by sort of more regional and state and national media, and tap into wider social and political issues, so it is relevant to that high level media. But you also need to be able to dip down into the more localised issues that local and regional level media can identify at that community level. So I guess it's thinking about where you want your stuff to go and making sure that there's something there for everyone to pick up on. So having the really high level results and then really drilling down into what the implications are for communities. We've also found, I guess, in structuring our media releases, we've found that it can also sometimes be quite strategic to issue joint media releases with other organisations involved in your research, particularly if they sort of have more media pull than a university might. So local councils or government departments and advocacy organisations have been involved in funding some of our research. So in some cases we have linked with them to do a media release, which has allowed us to sort of branch out into other parts of the media that we might not necessarily have been able to access otherwise. I guess some of the other strategies that I've used, as Clint said, it's really important to register as a media expert with your university if you feel that you'd be confident in being able to do so. That way they will contact you if they get a query on your particular topic. I'm registered as an expert on the Latrobe site, and I have been approached a few times to do interviews on various things. And again, it's been interesting in that, as Clint said, it hasn't been directly applicable to my particular field of research. And I've had to say, you know, if they've asked me certain questions, I don't know. But that's been perfectly fine, because the interviewer has then sort of been able to swing the topic around to something that I am more familiar with. So it has turned out to be sort of not the interview they were intending on, but it's still relevant to what they want to do. Get more out of me as a researcher, because I was more able to comment on some of the things that were asking me. So it can be a joint constructed interview in some cases, but you have to be able to say, I don't know. So don't, as Clint said, don't try and make something up, because that will come back to bite you. Do media training, as Clint said, really important. And one of the strategies that I've found really important too is to actually engage in some publicity and promotion within your university. So doing things on YouTube, doing features in your faculty, school and university newsletters. This is often the stuff that comes up on Google if people Google a specific topic looking for an expert. For example, I've done a YouTube piece for Latrobe talking about my research for the uni YouTube channel, which, you know, has the buzz lines in it that my research encompasses social participation, older people, rural areas. So if you Google that, that will come up. And I've also volunteered to be interviewed for grant bodies who have funded my research, that are looking for case studies of research they've funded to be featured on their website. So often you'll be contacted by grant bodies, and if they want this, don't think, oh no, I'm not going to do that. It's a really good opportunity to promote your research, particularly if you're using the keywords within that case study that your research is involved with. So for me, social participation, older people, rural, because again, if someone's Googling for an expert in that, if you use the right words, you'll come up. And I guess on that, this sounds really pretentious and wrong, but Google yourself, you know, and see what's coming up, or Google the keywords relating to your research and see who's coming up. If you Google yourself, I mean, that's the information that people are getting if they Google you. If they think, oh, Rachel does rural research, I wonder what we could get her to talk about. So if they Google you, make sure the information, you know, on your bio or that's up on, you know, on all the various websites is accurate, so that when people are contacting you, they're contacting you for the right reasons. So in that, I guess one of the strategies that I've been trying to put in place is to make sure that research on these forums using the key contemporary terms that other people are using. So if you go to something like Google Trends and look at what people are searching for, you know, are they using social inclusion as a search term, or are they referring to social connectedness or whatever? So that way, if people are searching for experts on a particular topic, if you're using the right terms within, you know, the stuff you're putting out there, you'll come up as an expert. So it's all about trying to structure your media profile to be applicable for what people are looking for, essentially, in the media. I'm going to talk quickly about the conversation, because this is a really, I guess, key avenue of getting your research out there into the public forum at the moment. I can't really talk too much about this from the perspective of how you get your stuff into this forum. I have actually had stuff in the conversation, but as part of my previous life as a sports historian, I have been approached specifically by the conversation a number of times to do pieces for them with the Olympics. I have done research on the Olympics in my previous life, and they were looking for someone to write about demonstration sports at the Olympics, which I had actually written a paper on a postgrad student and had it archived on a sporting website. So that was how they found me and identified me as an expert. And now every Olympics I get an email asking me to write something about Olympic sports. I guess, though, this point kind of reinforces the importance of having your stuff available in forums other than academic journals. Based on my experience, it's kind of clear that the conversation will Google if they're looking for an expert on something, and they're not necessarily, I can't say this with actual fact, but they're probably not necessarily going to read your very academic sounding article, but they might look at things like conference slides or abstracts or presentations that you've done. So making sure that that sort of stuff is accessible online as well. So if they are looking for an expert, they can find you. Based on my experience though, I guess if you are approached to do something for the conversation, I strongly recommend that you do it as, I guess I found it consolidates your position as an expert, and I use expert, in the field among a more general audience, and it gets your stuff out there in a more digestible form for the media to pick up. I've been invited to write book chapters, academic book chapters based on some of the work I've had in the conversation by people I didn't know previously. And as I said, I get regular requests for other sport-related pieces, which is kind of awkward as I'm not really working in that area anymore. The last thing I want to touch on is the use of Twitter to promote your research. And I must confess I'm a bit of a relative newcomer to Twitter, because our university is really pushing this as an engagement tool to promote your research and get it out there. And while I was a bit resistant in Twitter for work purposes, I have actually found it a really good way and a good motivation, I guess, to follow what's happening in the media in relation to some of the issues to do with my research, which I haven't, I must admit, previously made time for. I'm too busy reading the academic stuff. But it's also a really good way to track what's happening overseas by following international academics. So when setting me up for Twitter, I went through this whole process with our media department, who gave me some really good tips on how to use Twitter, which I am now following religiously, and I will share some of these with you. I guess the ones that I've found really useful in trying to get my Twitter profile set up. I guess the first point is fairly explanatory, is to follow people, but particularly the key influencers in your field of research. So make sure you're following the important, not just the important researchers, but also the important bodies. So like the AAG, Department of Health, you know, whatever might be relevant for your particular field of research. And to build up a network of Twitter users in your particular area. For me, that's rural ageing. But for those of you who are doing other things, it might be slightly different. And to make sure you're engaging in conversations with others. So following hashtags and doing a search for a particular hashtag and replying to people using that hashtag, and using hashtags when you tweet. So doing a search for what people are using as hashtags and linking into their conversations by using that hashtag as well. So people are seeing what you post. Daily engagement is really important to build followers initially and to establish an influence on Twitter, I guess. I'm at the moment setting aside 5 minutes a day to use Twitter. So either at the beginning or the end of the day, I get on and I have a look and I add some followers and you know, tweet something. So setting aside some time to do it every day is quite important. It's really easy to just say, I haven't got time, I've got 3 papers due, I've got a grant application to review, blah, blah, blah. 5 minutes is all you need. And promote your Twitter account. So put it on your email signature, put it on your conference presentations. If you get the chance in the media, use your Twitter account. And try and get people with lots of followers to retweet your stuff if you can, because that builds your Twitter profile. This all sounds very interesting. And also, a really good tip is most academics who use Twitter do their tweeting in work hours. So they do it between, say, 8 to 5 p.m. So make sure you're tweeting then as well, so your stuff gets maximum exposure. Not everyone is on Twitter at 9 o'clock at night for work purposes, I guess. And a big problem I've had is, I guess, when I started, is what do I tweet? You know, you don't just want to be retweeting news articles all the time, retweeting other people's stuff. You need to really build your own web presence so people will actually go and look at what you've had to say, rather than just thinking, oh, she's just retweeting stuff all the time. So I guess in helping me tweet stuff that's interesting and not just the same old stuff all the time, I've set up some Google News alerts to keep on top of current affairs in my area that I might be able to comment on. You know, it's really good at the moment with the budget and the proposed rise in the pension age. That's quite contemporary on Twitter at the moment, so there's a lot of debates that you can weigh into about that. To try and link into with what people are searching for. So again, to use Google Trends to see what people are looking for on Google and maybe link in with that using your hashtags. And don't just make statements, so actually ask questions, so try and engage your audience. So for example, if you are retweeting a news article, don't just retweet it, sort of ask your followers, you know, what they think about it or what the implications might be. So try and get a conversation going so it is a bit more interactive. Something that I've been doing a bit, if you go to an event or conference or something, tweet and say something about it and tag the organisation who's running the conference or the forum, if possible, because that also gets all their followers to see your stuff. If you do a presentation somewhere, like at a conference, or you might just do one to the local council or whatever, tweet about it. Make sure too that you can tweet a link to your slides if possible. So if your slides are available online, make sure you tweet the link too. That way, for example, if the conversation, maybe you're looking for an expert on something, they can go and look at your slides then and say, okay, we might see if she can do a piece on something. And the same with articles, I guess, too. If you're tweeting about your articles that you've just had published, make sure that you include a link that people can get your stuff from. If you're going to tweet about something, it's really important that people can have a look at it for themselves, so they can read it and maybe they might engage in discussion about it, which would be amazing if that actually happened. If you're just new on Twitter, and I actually found this really useful too, is to see if your university has a guide to using Twitter. I think most media departments have developed a guide for using Twitter now, or alternatively, you can find some really good guides for the academic use of Twitter online. I think I looked at one by the London School of Economics. They've got a really good one that they give their academics to look at, and that just gives you some tips too on how you can tweet more effectively and sort of promote your stuff a bit more effectively using social media. And if anyone's interested in following me, you can follow me at, it's just my name. So I expect you all to follow me on Twitter now. But, you know, just in closing, I guess, that's just been a brief overview of some of my media experiences. In all the ones that I've done, I haven't had any negative experiences, touch wood, but I have had a lot of, particularly on television and in radio, where it's been more, I have been asked to speculate on certain things and speculate as to the effect of my research results for communities and that sort of thing, and that I've found quite confronting as an early career researcher, because I've sort of had to think about, you know, can I speculate, in the position to speculate, what happens if I say something confronting, and I guess I've found it easier to not speculate and just say, as Clint said, I don't know, but, and then to reinforce my key message. So I guess that's been my cookie cutter response to dealing with questions from the media that I haven't felt equipped to answer, I've felt uncomfortable in answering. And that's probably the hardest thing that I've found in dealing with the media to date, is that they will often ask you to speculate on particular issues. And whereas you may actually have the knowledge to speculate, you may not be comfortable doing so, and I would strongly suggest that you don't, based on my own experience. But that's really all I have formally prepared, but I'm really happy for everyone to ask me some questions if they want.
Well, you've almost convinced me to get involved in...
It is quite fun, and it really does make you actually follow the current affairs a bit more closely in terms of, you know, what's happening in the news. And I must admit, I've been very poor at doing that because I'm so engrossed in the academic literature. It is really valuable to know what's happening.
Oh, that was a great presentation. Well done, mate. Let's open it up for general questions.
I have one.
Yeah.
Sure. I just wonder, have you used Facebook at all? Sites. For example, I'm doing bushfire research, and I haven't used it yet. That's why I'm asking the question. But there's several bushfire Facebook sites, little local regional ones in rural areas, right through to ones that Melbourne has partly administered in beyond the bushfires research sites. Have you ever used it to promote Seek participants through Facebook, or are there any things you'd have to be very cautious about?
I haven't, no, and it's something that I have considered. I think Facebook probably has some benefits in terms of it being, I guess, a bit more sort of interactive, and there is more room for the text in that you can sort of post links a bit more effectively and engage with people. I mean, I guess in terms of recruiting participants, I think my research is primarily with older people, so Facebook for me is not always going to be the best forum to recruit participants. That's not to say that older people don't use it, they're going to it in droves, but I can certainly see the benefits in recruiting through Facebook, but I'm not sure on the protocols for doing so. But yeah, I think it could be quite useful.
Can I just comment on that one, please?
Yep.
Hello? Yeah, we used
Go for it, Erica.
Facebook. Hi. We used Facebook for our equal play recruitment, and it was brilliant. The most participants we've recruited, that was purely through Facebook. It was because it was sort of very sensitive research and included children from to comment from 14 to 24. Facebook made them sort of anonymous, so but we also had to be very careful in terms of sorry, would you not be? Yeah. So Facebook, the sensitivity and the anonymity was really good, but we had to be very careful to get the trollers away, because it was about LGBT community. It was about people from gay, lesbian and transgender community feel about sport and physical activity participation. So we had some people trying to be leaving terrible comments, and we had to deal with that. But it's been very successful in terms of recruitment.
Can I just ask one quick question too? Not necessarily of Rachel, but from the first speaker. Does Monash have a policy on the use of Facebook to do research, like a snowballing method, so for recruitment? Because I'm working with young adults, and the last time I did research, I found Monash University in Gippsland put information about my project on their Facebook site and linked with some disaster recovery things, and that's where I got most of my participants.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, have we got a policy, or is there somebody I could speak to?
Yes, there is definitely general. I don't really want to talk about the specifics of what you've just mentioned. There is a generalist social media policy which you'll be able to find on the intranet, or if you look under the Office of Marketing Communications, the University Central Media arm, you'll find it there. If you want advice, I suggest you speak to Rachel Foster or to Samantha Blair, who are both full-time social media operatives. Our faculty cannot afford to have a full-time social media operative, and I take Rachel's point. It's really great to be engaged in social media, but it takes so much work. And yesterday I saw a presentation on LinkedIn, which is going to become, I would suggest, the predominant social media tool, and it's fantastic for groups to set up a dialogue. But the Monash company site, there are specific company sites in LinkedIn now, it would be a full job to actually run it. And as Rachel pointed out, you almost need a discipline of 5 minutes a day. And that's, I run the faculty Twitter site. I think 3 of us have access. 2 of us actually use it. It takes time and effort, and I try to put things up there every day, as Rachel said. I don't get into conversations, I'd have to say. Hashtags we use at an event, and I'll point out that when we're at, for example, when I go to the World Health Summit, I used to try and submit a 5-minute video production every day. And when you're sending files back and you're having to do pre-production on the ground and you're the only person there with a camera with a remote control, very, very hard. Brilliant to suddenly go, I'm doing all this on my phone. I just sat in the sessions and tweeted about, Jose Ramos Horta is talking about the impact of health in East Timor. Click, and here's a photo of him. It's a wonderfully simple tool. And at the end of the session, you walk away and your job's done. And you're already connecting with your audience. So I can't convey to you how great I think Twitter is. Facebook we use more for our undergraduate recruitment. I don't really want to talk about that because it's not really my province. I definitely suggest you have a look at LinkedIn, particularly if you want to form groups to communicate with people that you know.
Yes,
and I'd also very much endorse what Rachel said about the conversation. We own the conversation. It's owned by universities. It is, if you like, a safe learning environment. It's a great way to put the story up if the story is ready. If not, they'll tell you, go back and develop this fantastic tool for an early career researcher to start building up a profile, but also to get accustomed to getting into, well, it is social media, in fact, online media, and getting your message across.
Thank you.
Joanne?
I think another site is ResearchGate. I think that's worth looking into. On the issue of Facebook, I actually do think that there are issues that we need to be aware of and are actually very difficult to pin down in terms of data management, privacy. Facebook is not private on any level. Whatever you put in, you do not own. And I think it depends on how it's being used and how it's being set up, but I don't think I just think there's some very big issues about using something like Facebook for recruitment. Like I said, nothing is private. I think there are probably issues with regards to Google ads. Nothing's transparent in a lot of these areas or sites. The technology is very complex, and as we all know, when we sign up to one of these and they say, have you read the agreement, you usually go yes, because you can't access it without that, but none of us are going to go through those pages and pages and pages of a contract, and even if we did, we probably wouldn't understand it. And I'm talking... Go on.
I'm sorry. That's why I asked the question, because it is quite worrying. But at the same time, doing research and knowing that in rural areas, that age group, because of the difficulties, isn't being engaged. And in my previous research, young adults said they were out of the loop in terms of recovery information for that reason, because when the 2009 bushfires were on, nobody, including Monash University, had a policy or a capacity to set up a website, a disaster website, other than email, and those students found that really alienating. So I just hope that Monash will do a bit more work on that, because it's really difficult.
Yeah, and I think I think there is a real need. I'm a co-convener of the Monash Research Ethics Forum, which we've had a few meetings, and in one of those meetings we actually did a little forum for a government agency where they were wanting to recruit using Facebook. So it was actually an interesting conversation that we had, and it was the pros and cons of doing that. So that's why I'm actually in the Faculty of IT. So the whole information management, privacy, data is really interesting. I think if you wanted to use Facebook as a mode of promoting something, there's no reason why you couldn't. But you can give people the information so they can go outside of that. So
can I interrupt with a point? I work for the Australian Longitudinal Study on Women's Health, and we just recruited about 17,000 women, of which the majority we got through Facebook. And I think you can link to an external site so you can avoid those issues of privacy. It's when you're just using the free capabilities that you have to worry about people, liking your page and therefore being connected to your study and probably a participant. But there are ways to get around it. And
I think all the stuff needs to be out. Those links need to link outside of Facebook or similar sites. And if you can do that, so I'm not sure, but if you can do that, then that's better. If it's within, like I said, and as you're saying, the moment you like something, it's not even that, the moment you look at something, because Google, Facebook, they actually study where you click, what you write, what you delete, everything that you do is being studied. It is really detailed, and it's quite scary when you think about it like that. We can't... What we do for ourselves personally is one thing. The moment you start collecting that, or connecting to other people, and they become implicated in that or connected to it, then I think we have a responsibility as researchers.